A country's having a rough decade when it declares war on wildlife. Picture this. It's the 1950s. The United States is flexing its post-war muscle, building highways, inventing fast food, and generally feeling unstoppable. There's a new suburb popping up every 15 minutes, and a TV in every living room. Progress feels inevitable, like nothing, and no one can slow America down, except, apparently, pigeons. Yes, pigeon, and starling, and sparrows. At some point in the mid-20th century, someone in government looked at these tiny, fluttering, bread-stealing menaces and decided these guys are a national security threat. Now, this wasn't your average nuisance control plan. No, this was bureaucratic madness disguised as strategy. The US didn't just want to reduce the bird population, they wanted to eradicate all of them. So began one of the strangest military-style operations in American history, Operation Bird Control, or, as it's better remembered by the poor souls who lived through it, the Bird War. And spoiler alert, humanity lost. Before you roll your eyes, it's important to understand why this happened. Because in the 1950s, the US government had a habit of taking every problem, big or small, and trying to fix it with overwhelming force. The Cold War had taught officials one thing: if something moves, it's probably a communist, and if it flies, even worse. Of course, the real story isn't quite that simple. The war on birds wasn't about ideology, it was about poop. Mountains of it, entire city blocks coated in a thin, corrosive layer of bird dropping. In places like St. Louis and New York, statues were dissolving, cars were corroding, and public health officials were panicking. The headlines started calling it an avian invasion. Experts warned about disease. And because this was the golden age of government overreaction, officials didn't think, maybe we should find a balanced solution. They thought, mobilize the scientists, soon. The U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service teamed up with agricultural departments, state agencies, and, naturally, the military. Because when you're America in the 1950s, every problem is just another war waiting to happen. And thus, the stage was set. The plan: develop a government-backed nationwide campaign to wipe out nuisance birds across the country. The method, well, that's where things get weird. Let's rewind to the late 1940s and early 50s, that magical post-war era when everything smelled like optimism and leaded gasoline. The US government was swimming in confidence. They'd just helped win the biggest war in history, built nuclear weapons, and invented TV dinners. The national motto might as well have been, what could possibly go wrong? Now, if you were a city official at the time, birds weren't just background noise, they were a logistical nightmare. Pigeons had overrun downtown areas, nesting in courthouses, bridges, power plants, anywhere remotely resembling a ledge. Starlings and sparrows clogged ventilation systems and shorted out transformers. The Chicago Tribune once described parts of the city as looking like a Hitchcock movie before Hitchcock. So, local leaders did what all good bureaucrats do when faced with a messy, complicated problem. They blamed the federal government and asked for money. That's how the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service got involved, not because they wanted to, but because politicians demanded action. The public was complaining, sanitation departments were overwhelmed, and the phrase bird menace had officially entered newspaper headlines. Soon, scientists at the Department of Agriculture were called in to brainstorm solutions, and bless them, they tried. At first, the ideas were reasonable: improve waste management, install bird spikes, maybe use some harmless deterrents. But reasonable solutions don't get you federal funding. What gets funding is something with a code name and a budget line that sounds like a Bond villain. Enter Operation Bird Control. The plan? To humanely reduce nuisance bird populations across American cities and farmland. The phrase humanely reduce was doing a lot of heavy lifting, because what they really meant was, let's invent a chemical weapon for pigeons. And yes, that's exactly what they did. Government chemists got to work creating a bird poison that could be mass-produced and distributed nationwide. Their first major success was a compound called starlicide, which, I swear, sounds like something Lex Luthor would patent. It was technically named DRC-1339, but let's be honest, if you're putting side in the name, you're already giving away your moral alignment. The pitch was simple: a targeted chemical that would kill starlings, blackbirds, and pigeons, but supposedly spare other animals. A kind of smart bomb for wildlife. And to the scientists' credit, it sort of worked, on paper, but out in the field? Oh boy, that's where things got feathery, fast. Within months, cities were deploying everything from poisoned grain to gas sprayers. They even used airplanes to disperse toxins over rural areas because if there's one thing history keeps proving, it's that mass aerial poisoning campaigns always end well. Farmers were thrilled at first. Their crops, previously swarmed by flocks, suddenly looked safe, but then the collateral damage reports started coming in. Dead songbirds, chickens, ducks, and in one memorable case, a small herd of poisoned cows that had eaten contaminated grain. The U.S. government's war on birds had officially gone off the rails, and if you think this story can't get any more absurd, wait until you see what happened when the scientists realized their bird poison was spreading through the food chain and started affecting the predators that were supposed to help them. Because nothing says victory like accidentally killing your own ally. At first, Operation Bird Control seemed to be working. Reports rolled in from Kansas, Nebraska, Ohio. Significant reductions in bird population, less crop damage, fewer droppings in downtown areas. Officials congratulated themselves. Memos were typed. Press releases were optimistic. You could almost hear the bureaucrats patting themselves on the back. Finally, we're winning the war on poop. But nature, as it tends to do, had other plans. See, the thing about biological systems is that they're connected. That's not exactly a shocking revelation today, but in the 1950s, government agencies still treated ecosystems like a badly wired house. If you flip a switch and something explodes, that's probably fine as long as the lights stay on. Starlicide, our villain of the story, didn't exactly discriminate as much as its inventors claimed. It didn't care if you were a pest or a protected species. It just did what poisons do best. Soon, conservationists started noticing eerie silences in rural areas. Whole stretches of farmland had gone quiet. No chirps, no fluttering wings, just wind. Dead birds began showing up by the hundreds, sometimes thousands. Pigeons, sure, but also doves, robins, meadowlarks, species that had never even been on the nuisance list. And then came the predators. Hawks and owls that fed on the poisoned birds began dropping out of the sky. Coyotes and foxes scavenged carcasses and suffered the same fate. Basically, the U.S. government had invented a self-propagating ecological time bomb. Farmers were horrified, not just because of the smell, which by all accounts was biblical, but because the natural balance was unraveling right in front of them. Without the small birds and raptors, rodents began multiplying like, well, rodents. Within a year, the very fields that had once been protected from birds were now crawling with mice. The agricultural reports read like parody. Significant decline in avian interference observed. Corresponding increase in rodent infestation recorded. Translation: we killed the birds. Now the mice are throwing a rave. Meanwhile, in urban centers, the fallout took on a more ironic tone. You see, pigeons are basically the raccoons of the sky. They thrive on chaos. And while Starlicide and other control measures hit them hard at first, the survivors adapted fast, really fast. Some started avoiding treated grain entirely. Others began nesting in new, harder-to-reach areas, inside vents, under bridges, even behind neon signs. The city of New York, after spending thousands on avian deterrence, discovered that pigeon populations were higher than before. Turns out, when you wipe out a large portion of a species, the few that remain reproduce like it's the end of the world, which for them, it kind of was. So within a few years, America had fewer songbirds, fewer hawks, and more pigeon. The math wasn't mathing. By the late 1950s, newspapers that once ran headlines about bird infestation were now printing stories about mysterious wildlife die-offs. Public sentiment shifted from kill them all to maybe we went too far. And just as the government began quietly stepping back from mass poisoning, the scientists realized something deeply inconvenient. The poisons they'd developed were accumulating in the environment, in soil, water, and other animals. The ripple effect of the bird war was becoming undeniable. But here's the twist. This ecological fiasco didn't just kill birds. It ended up helping launch one of the most important environmental movements in American history. Because out of all this toxic absurdity came a book, a scientist, and a national awakening that would forever change how humanity viewed its relationship with nature. But we'll get there. First, let's talk about the fallout, the bureaucratic panic. the blame game, and how the same government that started the war on birds tried to quietly bury the evidence of just how badly they'd lost it. By the late 1950s, the war on birds had gone from a confident crusade to a full-blown embarrassment. Federal agencies were realizing that their shiny new chemical solution had turned into an ecological horror show. Songbird numbers were plummeting, predators were dying, and farmers were writing furious letters about rodent takeovers. Even worse, for the government at least, reporters had started asking questions, and nothing terrifies a mid-century bureaucrat quite like a journalist with a notepad and a conscience. The official response? Pretend nothing happened. Internal memos from the Department of Agriculture started using phrases like temporary fluctuations and localized population adjustments. Translation: please don't say mass bird die-off in public. At one point, officials even tried to rebrand the program, calling it a pest management initiative, because apparently if you change the name, the dead hawks don't count. Local governments, meanwhile, were quietly sweeping up thousands of carcasses before sunrise to keep the mess off the morning news. One city official in Ohio admitted that, for months, the sanitation department had been working overtime under unusual circumstances, which is a very polite way of saying we're shoveling dead birds before breakfast. But here's where the story takes a fascinating turn. Among the scientists watching this fiasco unfold was a woman named Rachel Carson, a marine biologist and writer with a gift for turning complex science into poetry. She began investigating the growing reports of animal deaths linked to pesticides and chemicals, not just starlicide, but also the infamous DDT. Carson realized the problem wasn't one bad chemical. It was a mindset. The idea that humanity could control nature through brute force and technology without understanding the consequences. And in 1962, she published Silent Spring. That book hit like a thunderclap. It exposed how chemicals meant to protect humanity were quietly dismantling ecosystems, killing birds, and seeping into the very food we ate. The title wasn't poetic exaggeration. She was literally describing a future spring with no birdsong. It was the ultimate punchline to the bird war, the silence that followed. The government initially dismissed her as alarmist. Industry groups tried to discredit her, calling her hysterical, unscientific, even a threat to progress. You know, the usual greatest hits. But the public listened. Carson's work sparked outrage, then reflection, and eventually, a movement. Within a decade, her influence helped lead to the creation of the Environmental Protection Agency and the banning of several toxic pesticides. Ironically, the same government that once waged war on birds was now building institutions to protect them. Talk about a plot twist. And yet, the most poetic part? Despite everything, the poison, the policies, the arrogance, the birds came back. Nature, given half a chance, is remarkably good at cleaning up our mess. Populations of many species slowly recovered. Urban pigeons, of course, bounced back with the kind of enthusiasm only pigeons can muster. The government may have lost the war, but the birds? They turned the battlefield into a nesting ground. By the 1970s, America had quietly moved on. Operation Bird Control was scrubbed from most public record, remembered only in scattered reports and ecological studies. It became one of those historical footnotes everyone pretends didn't happen, right up there with radiation as a medical treatment for acne. But history, as it loves to do, kept the receipts. So what do you do after losing a war to creatures that weigh less than a sandwich? You learn, you adapt, and if you're very lucky, you listen. Because while the US may have botched its war on birds, that colossal failure accidentally kicked off a new understanding of environmental responsibility. It was, in the strangest possible way, the dumbest smart thing America ever did. Every so often, history hands us a story so absurd it feels like a cosmic joke, and then reminds us that we were the punchline all along. The US bird war wasn't just about pigeons or poisons. It was about something far more human. Our pathological need to control everything we don't understand. In the 1950s, that mindset defined progress. The post-war boom had convinced America that technology could solve any problem: hunger, disease, nature itself. If something moved, we could manage it. If something resisted, we could redesign it. The only flaw in that thinking was, well, reality. Because nature doesn't take orders. It negotiates, slowly, quietly, on its own terms. And when we try to win against it, the score usually ends up looking like nature to 1, humanity to 0 again. The war on birds was the perfect encapsulation of that arrogance. A government so sure of its brilliance that it weaponized chemistry against flocks of sparrows and somehow expected a tidy victory. Instead, it got a slow-motion ecological disaster, a PR nightmare, and an unintentional spark for the modern environmental movement. Not exactly the heroic ending they had in mind, but that's the beauty of history, isn't it? We rarely learn from our triumphs. It's the failures, the big, loud, ridiculous ones, that end up teaching us who we really are. The bird war taught us that every pest plays a role, every action has a ripple, and every quick fix eventually sends the bill. It's easy to mock the officials who signed off on it, and trust me, they earned it, but the impulse behind their mistake is still alive and well. You can see it today in every attempt to outsmart nature, when we tinker with ecosystems, chase invasive species with fire and fury, or dump chemicals into problems we don't fully grasp. The methods evolve, the mindset doesn't, and yet there's something oddly comforting about that, because it means the bird war isn't just a cautionary tale, it's a mirror, a feathered reminder that progress isn't about conquering the world, it's about learning how not to. So, maybe the real lesson is, if you ever find yourself in a meeting where someone says, "We should declare war on birds," just don't, because history has already tried that. And the birds? They won. Today, the war on birds sounds like something from The Onion, a bureaucratic fever dream in which the world's most powerful nation squared off against a bunch of winged scavengers and lost. But the best part? The birds didn't just survive, they adapted. City pigeons, for instance, now recognize human faces, navigate subways, even adjust their feeding schedules around rush hour. In other words, while humanity was busy inventing smartphones, pigeons were developing urban street smart. Somewhere out there, a pigeon is probably watching you drop a French fry and thinking, "Your move, primate." Meanwhile, starlings, one of the original enemy combatants, are thriving too. They've formed synchronized murmurations so vast they look like living clouds, twisting and folding through the sky like they're performing victory laps. It's hard not to see it as poetic revenge, elegant choreography from the species we once tried to erase. And the government? Well, it quietly retired from ornithological warfare. The modern U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service now focuses on protection, conservation, and ecological balance, basically. The exact opposite of its 1950s job description. There's a kind of cosmic symmetry. The nation that once gassed flocks from airplanes now funds programs to reintroduce endangered species. Progress, it turns out, sometimes looks like an apology with wings. But let's be honest, humanity's record with creative problem-solving hasn't exactly improved. We've replaced starlicide with microplastics, pesticide, and geoengineering debates that sound suspiciously familiar. What if we just fix nature by breaking it slightly differently? The past is whispering, and we're still pretending not to hear it. That's why stories like this matter. Not because they're funny, though, let's admit. They absolutely are. But because they reveal the pattern, the confidence, the chaos, and the eventual oops. The bird war reminds us that for all our technology and ambition, we're still winging it. And maybe that's okay. Maybe the goal isn't to stop making mistakes, it's to make better ones. At least ones that don't involve mass aerial pigeon warfare. Because if there's one lesson history keeps teaching us, it's that nature always has the last laugh, and it usually sounds a lot like birdsong. So next time you see a pigeon strutting down the sidewalk like it owns the place, maybe give it a little. It probably deserves it. After all, not every species can say they fought the United States government and won, and that was the time the United States declared war on birds. Not metaphorically, literally. It had scientists, budgets, cody names, and somehow the birds still came out on top. If you enjoyed watching humanity lose a tactical battle to pigeon, imagine what else because history is basically just one long highlight reel of brilliant ideas that went spectacularly wrong. So if you like your history with a side of irony, hit that like button, subscribe, and turn on notification. Because here at History Oops, we dig up the stories that make textbooks blush. From poised pigeons to kings with worse decision-making than your group chat, we cover it all. See you next time.